we were also being looked after and protected by one of the warring factions of the Anunnaki. So, a truce was called and meetings held, whereupon it was decided that the best thing to do with the human beings was to separate them, divide them up, give them different languages, different skin colors, different ways to live. But, more than anything else, keep the human beings from getting together as one. That's when we're at our most dangerous. As it was back then, so it is now. And so I came to a reasonable answer, about whom and what we are, and why we're in the mess that we're in now. Hidden from view in May of 1979, I had a series of dreams, more like visions, in which I saw a large American Airlines jet taking off from my runway. As it began to lift into the air, it made a sudden dip with one wing, turned over backwards, then fell nose first into the ground. The explosion was a terrible thing to see, and I could actually feel the deaths of all the people aboard. Very rarely since then have I cried more than on those nights, 25 years ago. Along with those visions came a sense, or more like a compulsion, to do something. But what to do wasn't an easy thing to figure out. I first began by telling my family, who listened, but that was about all they could do. I called American Airlines and they hung up on me. These were the days before the internet, so finding resources were very limited. So, I called the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. Unbeknownst to me, the FAA actually had a written procedure that dealt with people calling in, claiming to have a premonition of a plane crashing, and I was put in touch with Paul Williams, the facility manager for the FAA, at the Greater Cincinnati Airport. For 4 intense days Mr. Williams, his immediate superior Jack Barker, and myself had numerous conversations relating to my vision. Notes were taken and brainstorming sessions occurred where we tried to piece everything together, to pinpoint the answer to the questions I didn't have the answers for. Where and when. But we failed. On May 25, 1979, American Airlines Flight 191, on a takeoff from Chicago's O'Hare Field lost an engine, inverted, then crashed into the ground, killing all 271 passengers and crew. It remains to this very day, the worst airline disaster in American history. In the months and years following the disaster, the story about my having known about crash became worldwide news. From front-page stories in the newspapers, to featured articles in magazines, to television interviews, I was celebrated because I had the distinction of being the only person who had had a precognitive experience fully documented prior to the event, by a government agency. Though offered thousands of dollars for the exclusive rights to my story, I turned down every offer, and in 1985 did my last American interview with the ABC television news program 20/20. In 1999 I did my last interview with the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, under the condition that the program never be aired in the United States. My reasons were, at least to my way of thinking, simple. I could not profit from a vision that I had no idea where it came from and that had caused so many deaths. And I'm going to talk about that here for a bit, the deaths. Without having a background to understand human beings and our emotions, I watched every night for 10 nights the deaths of hundreds of souls. And I could actually feel each and every one of them cry out. And the words I'm using don't even come close, the emotional outpouring I felt from that plane. The best way to describe it is that for those 10 nights I experienced the pain and anguish as a part of myself. The past 25 years of my life have been devoted to understanding what happened to me, and more specifically why it happened, in the first place. Why, out of all the people on earth, was I chosen to have these visions? Those were the questions I sought answers for, and what has taken the past 25 years of my life to find out. I believe right now that reason for what happened to me back then has to do with what we are facing today. In March 2003, and for only the second time in my life, I had another series of visions, and like the last time, 10 of them in a row. What I see is the Earth from the perspective of space. As I'm watching the Earth, I can see the Moon, over to the right side, and what appears to be a planetary-type object approaching the Earth from straight underneath. This object has two main characteristics: it is very large and it is very dark. As it approaches the Earth, my viewpoint narrows towards the Earth itself, the North American continent, and then as it veers off, at a 45-degree angle, I see the greater portion of the western part of the North American continent erupt, like a giant volcano. From this eruption dark gray clouds billow into the atmosphere, and I can make out fire below, or rather within, the clouds themselves. There immediately follows a ripple, emanating from the eruption, that goes around the whole Earth. At that point the vision ends, but not my dread. I'm going to digress here, for a moment, to explain to you something about myself. First of all, since the late 1980s I've been a very private man, and have worked hard to build a life of solitude and quiet. Many years of research have also led me to know that the first part of the 21st century would be a time of great chaos and change for the entire world. In knowing this, I've also prepared for as much as possible, including building an underground house, and ensuring that we have years of food, seeds, water, medicine, and other things one would need to survive for an extended period of time on their own.